As someone that started playing Wuthering Waves roughly a month ago, I feel like I have a relatively unique perspective on a lot of the mechanics of the game. If you had started playing this game at launch, you would have a very different experience to what I have playing through the same content because of new banners, new mechanics, new quality of life features, what have you. But the one thing that I think is the most different is combat, and more specifically seeing the progression of combat. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I start off playing as Spectral Rover in Jinzhou with characters like Yang Yang, Encore, Mortefi, and really all the characters that were available during the 1.x phase of the game. Combat is significantly different when compared to using the newer characters. The early stages of Wuthering Waves felt very much like reactive action hack and slash kind of combat, similar to something like Stellar Blade, where you have parrying and perfect dodge and some flashy combos, but visual clarity is not sacrificed at all, and you still have a relatively precise amount of control over your character's movements. Some characters had a little bit of forced movement in their abilities, but for the most part, the animations were clean, simple, and it was pretty easy to understand what was going on in combat. And I think this held true even deep into Renacida. Characters like Carlotta, Cantarella, and Rochia were a little bit more flashy than 1.x characters, but I could still understand what was going on, even with the added flair and forced movement that some of their kits required. But I think there was a stark shift in encounter design around the point that Yuno and Augusta were playable. At least that's when I felt like the change was significant enough for me to start paying attention to it. Augusta and Yuno have extremely flashy kits with lots of force movement. Yuno can just fly for most of the time. Augusta's just dashing everywhere, and when she's not doing that, she's up in the air doing like extremely crazy abilities, which is, I feel like it's not even selling it enough to say that is a stark contrast to the combat you'd experience when playing as someone like Spectral Rover or Chang Li, or heck, even Arrow Rover, who was introduced around the same time as these characters. And then there was like the full realization for me where I was playing as Galbrina in an early part of her storyline, and I was fighting against one boss, and after about a minute of fighting it, I actually just stopped for a moment and thought, wow, I have literally no idea what is going on right now between the vague movements of the enemy and having no idea how the character works, and all of the flashy animations and forced movement and just everything going on with Galbrina's kit, which still isn't even the peak of flashy design in this game right now. And then we get to characters like, you know, Lene, Mornay, and Imeth. So let's start with Lene. Almost all of her abilities have forced movement, and they're in the form of dashes that get you closer to the target you're trying to hit. And I will admit, I think her kit's kind of fun. There's simplicity to it, and it all kind of flows together really well. I find Mornay kind of boring, and there's an issue with Mornay and Imeth that I want to call, like, they have an issue with their abilities just being playable cutscenes. Mornay's heavy attack when she's flying is like a pseudo cutscene, and then, you know, everybody with their Resonance Liberation has a cutscene that you have to watch in combat. Imeth kind of just amps this up to like you're watching a feature-length film every time she's fielded in combat, and it really brings up the question of, do you want to actually play the game or just press buttons to trigger cutscenes? Now, these skill animations look cool, they're impressive, they're flashy, but they don't make combat fun. At least not for me. Obviously, this entire video is about my opinion, but I miss the more reactive gameplay that existed in the early stages of the game with the earlier characters. And while that type of gameplay still exists, like these characters are still playable, and not every character is going to be a feature-length film like Imeth is, this issue of flashy combat isn't just limited to the banner characters. The bosses are getting flashier and flashier, and one thing that I'm noticing a lot of lately is that a lot of these encounters have phases where the bosses are just like flying around or like dashing super far away from you, and you need either consistent gap closers that these newer kits offer, or ranged abilities, or the ability to fly to really keep up with them. Combat has become less of a reactive duel of like choosing your moments to attack, looking for openings, parrying. Who the heck does parrying anymore? And to a lesser case, like I find myself dodging a lot less just because I'm focused on playing the game as if it's like a rhythm game. You just want to go through your rotation as fast as possible, and any inconvenience or disruption to that rotation is just inherently frustrating, because that's what combat is. It's going through a rotation as fast as possible to kill the boss as fast as possible before you have to deal with any like mistakes or mechanics that disrupt that. And then let's talk about the new mechanic that was introduced in 3.0, like Toon Strain and Toon Rupture and Toon Breaking and Tuna Can. So I mentioned that combat really feels like a rhythm game where you're just going through the motions, trying to do your rotation as fast as possible to, you know, cover all your buffs, and then use your outro skill to make sure your next resonator is buffed as strong as possible to get those burst phases out. Well, now you introduce a mechanic where you have to stop your rotation to do this, another cutscene of burst damage to a boss that can also be used to interrupt their abilities. I think Toon Breaking is fun. I like the riposte mechanic in like Dark Souls and stuff like that. It always feels nice to get this huge hit on a boss. But the difference with Toon Breaking versus something like riposting in Dark Souls is that a riposte is like a reward for playing the game well, and Toon Breaking isn't necessarily that. It's just something that happens. Like, how different would the game be if you could only Toon Break after parrying or dodging or something like that, and it wasn't just like a meter that's built up by doing your rotation over and over? I think there's players in both camps that like the earlier form of combat that was much more reactive and thoughtful than what seems to be the meta now of just doing a rotation as fast as possible and watching a bunch of cutscenes during combat. In a game like Wuthering Waves, where you're expected to farm the same encounters over and over and over, there is definitely merit to having a type of combat that isn't reactive, but rather just muscle memory. You just want to kill these bosses as fast as possible. You want to do these encounters with as little variance as possible, because you're really just concerned with the result rather than the process. But I think there is a middle ground, and hopefully Kuro keeps looking for that middle ground rather than fully embracing this kind of combat that feels like you're not even really participating. I just feel like right now Wuthering Waves has two really different styles of combat that are offered, but the encounters that you can use them in definitely prefer one over the other. And the preferred one in this case tends to be the less interactive cutscene kind of combat that they're really pushing with these newer characters. This has just been something I wanted to talk about ever since I noticed it. As a new player, you can really feel the game changing drastically as you're going through each new zone and story chapter and getting to play all the characters kind of in release order. And kind of like overwhelmingly, I seem to prefer the earlier iterations of character kits as opposed to the newer ones. I mean, with the occasional exception, like I really like playing Linnea. She's kind of brain dead, but she's really fun. So I must say, I had the thought of recording this video and expressing my opinion on the issue before recording the clip I'm about to show you, where I have a minor, slight crash out over the combat in this game. Just a little disclaimer. Like, what is going on during all this? Tell me. If you look at this recording and you tell me you know what's going on, that this combat has visual clarity, I don't believe you. I am just mashing buttons. There's numbers all over the place. The entire stage is exploding. Like, is this the kind of combat that people want? It doesn't feel epic. It doesn't feel satisfying. It's just like random bullshit go. Like, this fight is the climax of an entire story arc, and it's literally just mash buttons as fast as you can. This is the epitome of what I'm talking about. The problem with combat in Wuthering Waves. It's not cinematic, it's not cool, it's a rave. It's straight up eye cancer. God. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm curious what you all think about the progression of combat in this game, like how it's evolved over its runtime. It definitely has its highs and lows, and I hope they keep innovating, but I hope they also kind of just reel it back in, you know, sacrifice some flair and flashiness for a little bit more clarity and precision in combat. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my content, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.